Greetings and welcome. Thank you for coming. Before we begin, let me take a few moments to give the obligatory like this video, comment on this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and more importantly, share this video with a friend, a sibling, your boss, or that guy next door that keeps stealing your Wi-Fi. Let's try and get this channel to 1,000 subscribers before Christmas. While you're at it, be sure to check out my Patreon channel. Consider becoming a subscriber and help keep my editor energized with sushi and cheap Japanese beer. Seriously, he's a large part of what makes this channel work. And lastly, a quick shout out to my Tier 4 patrons, Russ of the Frozen North, Neo5AC, Nick, Zachary Langmead, and Scared Wolf 1206. Thank you very much. And now, on with the story. The Deathworlders, a story by Philip R. Johnson, a.k.a. Hambone, Hambone HFY, and Hambone 3110. Chapter 24, An Alien World. Part 5. Date point, 10 years, 4 months, AV. HMS Sharman, Folktha, Cimbrean, the Far Reaches. Regarii. Chasing after a shoe was more than just a personal mission for me. It became a lucrative contract for the clan. Admiral Sir Patrick Knight had been summoned, and Regarii was now being politely interrogated in a meeting room somewhere in HMS Sharman's structure. Ayma apparently was to be debriefed separately. Somehow, Regarii had expected the Admiral to be a near clone of Major Powell, sturdy, strong, and rough. Knight, in fact, was tall and slender, and the translator rendered him with a refined intellectual accent similar to that of Clan High Mountain. "How so?" he asked. "The females are extremely devoted to their ideal of clan loyalty, more so than any male is to his clan, and that is quite a feat," Regarii explained. "Their devotion to one another apparently transcends species. They're in something of an uproar right now over the wisdom of bringing a human, Shu, into the clan, but the one thing that none of them will ever think of suggesting would be ejecting her from the clan of females. She's a sister, and will be a sister for as long as she lives." "And this benefits the Whitecrests how?" Knight inquired. "I am an apparently prestigious officer of Clan Whitecrest, and I led an exhaustive investigation chasing Shu across known space," Regarii explained. "Now, this was advantageous to Whitecrest first because it was a valuable intelligence-gathering venture in its own right. We tripled the reach of our surveillance network in searching for her. That alone would have been reason enough to do it, but the mating contracts—" "You did it all for the Nookie?" Powell asked. His expressions were always harder to read than most humans, but there was just enough there for Regarii to guess at a joke of some kind. Joking or not, however, the observation was completely on target. "For as long as the search continued," Regarii told him, "we had the respect and attention of practically every female on Gao. For males, that is a rare and hugely coveted position to be in. It means that for once we get to choose our mating partners, rather than the other way around. We advanced our breeding program by generations during this operation." Breeding program. "Selectively enhancing the Whitecrest line by mating with females carrying gene stock from other clans. The Stonebacks, the High Mountains, the One-Fangs. Breeding for strength, intelligence, reflexes. Every clan has such a program in effect, planning our own genetic futures." The humans shared an uneasy glance for some reason. "Is something the matter?" Regarii asked him. "Call it a cultural foible," Knight conceded. "Eugenics has been an historically, tricky subject on Earth. Where does Kirk come into this?" "When I was traveling with Shu and Ayma, we found ourselves with a dilemma," Regarii said, sitting back. Designed as the seats were for human proportions, his feet were dangling ridiculously, but he didn't care. "She wouldn't go back to Gao, you see. She was convinced that she would bring down the swarm of swarms just by being there. Who knows, maybe she was right. On the evidence of Capital Station, we wouldn't have been able to fight them, and the commune she lived at and all the city around it would have been inundated with slavering Preditors. I think that thought scared her more than the possibility of being eaten herself." Knight and Powell both nodded. Regarii recognized that nod. It was one that indicated agreement without wanting to interrupt. "Returning her to Earth was also not within our power. No channels of communication, no help from the Dominion. We didn't even know where Earth was. He paused. In fact, I still don't. The distal end of the border stars, Knight told him. A cluster we called the local group. Regari tried to recall what he could of the Dominion's galactic map. The galaxy was an incomprehensibly huge space, and the broad strokes creation of a notional feature such as a band of uninhabitable systems which marked the no-man's land between the Dominion and the Alliance inevitably included tens of thousands of stars. It was all far too big for any living being's brain to accommodate. A long way from Gao and from what the Dominion thinks of as civilization, then, he concluded. And with the Dominion actively obscuring that information and stymieing efforts to contact your species, well, we were forced to stay on the move. Shu disguised herself as a sister, and we took care to travel parts of the Dominion far from Gao, where she would be less likely to be discovered. It was there that we started to hear rumors. About Kirk, Powell checked. About Councillor Kirk and Regari had long since mastered the trick of letting his cybernetics transmit the name to the translator rather than trying to pronounce it. We would find stations where they were still talking about their vagrant Deathworlder, and the fact that one of the galaxy's most notorious political figures had just swept in, collected them, and departed. We had just started looking for him when, well, there was an incident. It persuaded Shu to leave us and to go it alone. What happened then? Ayma was furious with her, Regari remembered fondly. I think she'd forgotten that she was a human with human instincts. She saw her as a sister and expected her to behave like one. In what way? Knight asked. Forgive the broad generalization here, but the clan of females stand together, and they can be both savage and a bit stupid about it. Threaten one of them, and they will unite to make your life a misery, even if actually doing so is beyond their power. Humans, I think, will do that too, up to a point, and I think that point is the one where an individual decides to sacrifice themselves for the good of the rest. That's very broad strokes, Powell commented. Borne out by the individual examples that I have personally witnessed, Major. Sergeant Leo Price, for instance. Knight and Powell looked at one another again. It was amazing how much humans communicated between themselves just by taking a half-a-second glance at each other's faces. Regari had no idea what the unspoken conversation had entailed, but Powell cleared his throat. So, you returned to Gao, he said. By way of perfection, Regari duck nodded. Ayma didn't know why, but I made use of a resource. The contact, Knight guessed. Now how do you know about her? Regari demanded. Via Kirk. Ah, of course. I should have known he would use her services as well. Well, for a fair price, she sold me information concerning Kirk and his ship. Contact information as well, which turned out to be obsolete, or at least he never got in touch via those channels. I have no idea why not. In any case, he continued, when the White Crest clan set about trying to find Shu, we were able to trace her to a station in the signal stars. FTS 1090, Endless Possibility. The trail went dead there. Why? The station's traffic records were corrupted. Every ship that had stopped there over nearly half a Gowan year, their origin, destination, flight plans, all lost. All we had to go on was civilian rumor and gossips. And what did those have to say? They were abuzz. A Gowan female had fought with a human male and fled the station. Some time later, that human had left with some other humans in the company of a Turk. Fought? Knight asked. Wiped the floor with him, as you say, Regari commented, clearly pleased for his friend's prowess. The station's population weren't sure whether to be skeptical of the stories of human strength, or whether to start thinking Gowans are Deathworlders too. The idea of a disguise never crossed their minds, though, to be fair, it was a good disguise. That matches with Kirk's final report, Powell observed. That it does, Knight agreed. But those logs being corrupted is new information, and not Kirk's MO at all. Enemy action. Powell grunted and nodded. trying to cover their tracks. Which means that Kirk and his crew and Miss Chang stumbled across something important. At the kinds of speeds the sanctuary could get to, that something important could be anywhere, sir. True, but the escape pod is much slower. Enemy action, Regarii asked. What enemy? He knew a poker face when he saw one, and both Knight and Powell had impenetrable ones. Doesn't matter, Powell grunted. We do have plenty of enemies after all, Knight agreed, a touch more diplomatically, and this all happened 5 years ago. Regarii considered calling bullshit. It was a phrase he'd learned early on from Shu's movies and loved, but decided against it. It would only antagonize them and be unlikely to work. Not that I'm authorized to make a formal offer, he started, but the clans might well be interested in closer ties with humanity over the coming years. Knowing who your enemies are might shape that decision, or prepare us for coming up against them. Again, there was a borderline telepathic silent conversation between Knight and Powell that took little more than enough time for both men to glance at one another. Well said, Knight agreed. I'll need to take advice from my colleagues and superiors on that, however. By all means, Regarii agreed. Now, on to the matter of Ayma and I visiting Earth. Date point. 10 years, 4 months AV. Meraki Station, Uncharted System, Deep Space. Kirk. In the weeks since they had first arrived at Meraki Station, Lewis's initial experiments with the nanofactory had largely revolved around creating a series of construction drones, which in turn assembled for him an apartment, rebuilding part of the station's structure so that the nanofactory and its control center was basically his living room. The apartment itself was little more than a bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, and a large working area. The latter comprised of a commodious comfort chair, more volumetric screens, and work surfaces, and what looked to Kirk's eye like 100 data pads strewn all over the floor, piled on the surfaces, tucked into the corners of the chair, and generally litting the place like ticker tape in the aftermath of an especially pompous parade. Lewis was trying to keep himself to a healthy routine, to the point where Kirk was under strict orders from him to enter the apartment with a shock prod and zap him if he didn't stick to the rules he'd set himself. Quite why Lewis would need to be reminded to go to sleep, to bathe, to eat, and to change his clothing was a bit of a mystery, but as Kirk understood it, a human in the grip of an obsession could neglect his basic needs, and Lewis had self-diagnosed a strong propensity for exactly that kind of obsession. At least, that was how Kirk had described it to Vedrick. Lewis's exact words had been, "Dude, I'll fall asleep on a slice of moldy pizza inside of a week if you don't remind me to clean up and look after myself. Been there, done that." To his credit, Lewis was sticking to his schedule almost without prompting, and he was benefiting from it too. Aboard Sanctuary, he had stuck to the bare minimum of exercise that Julian and Kirk had conspired to force on him. Now, it was impossible for a human to seem scrawny by the standards of Kirk's species. Humans, even unfit, skinny humans, were pretty much nothing but muscle and bone, and those muscles and bones were denser, tougher, stronger, and proportionately larger. To a Returk's eyes, even Lewis was dense and sturdy enough to shake the deck plating as he walked, and Lewis was decidedly scrawny by human standards. His general proportions hadn't changed much on a regime of Tai Chi and yoga, but his movements had. Lewis had sort of flopped about the place before, treating being upright as something he did en route to sitting somewhere else, with shoulders slouched and expression distracted, only to focus when he sat at a terminal working on a stimulating challenge. Now, he moved with the same kind of fluid alertness that Allison and Julian had possessed. His back was straighter, his step lighter, his expression here and now. It was like he was always at a terminal these days, always working on a stimulating challenge. Maybe he was. He was certainly absorbing knowledge with a veracity that defied comprehension, and sometimes he made huge tangential links between two subjects that Kirk would never have thought to connect. What was the association between climate science and politics? What did either of them have to do with nanofactories? For that matter, how did biology and computer programming enmesh? Lewis had explained. Kirk prided himself that he was one of the smarter members of a species that had, prior to the arrival of humans and Gowans, been generally accepted as the only Sophons around who could give the Cortai a run for their money. But Lewis's exploration of those connections had been so arcane that he still wasn't sure he understood it. Could a local drought really spark a civil war, let alone a regional conflict that went on to drag in half the factions of an entire planet? How could software evolve? In what possible way were either of those already impenetrable relationships relevant to using the nanofactory to build a weapon against the hierarchy? Lewis had finally silenced his questions by instructing him to go read the Dirk Gently books, dude. Kirk hadn't been able to find an author by that name, but he had been introduced to Douglas Adams, to the concept of holistic, and, in researching that, to the whole field of chaos theory. The fundamental interconnectedness of all things seemed like a bizarre and nonsense concept at first, but the more Kirk dug into it, the more he realized that he had been exploiting exactly that principle ever since he'd left Outlook on Forever, relying on it even. Everything came back to humans in the end. After all, he'd planned to use them to tear down the rusty and stifling entrenched power of the Dominion from the inside. He'd snapped out of his thoughtful mood as he approached Lewis's door. Kirk had gone without company for a couple of days while Vedrig slept, and yesterday's attempt to check in with Lewis had ended in the human calling, "Busy! Come back tomorrow!" through the door. This time, the door opened. Lewis's outfit had changed dramatically for some reason. He bathed daily, and the first thing to come out of Milwaukee's nanofactory under his control had been a machine for washing and drying his clothes. Even though the Forge could have recycled them and built him new clothes every day if he'd wanted them, he'd stuck to the same fraying jeans and sand-colored t-shirts that he had been abducted in years ago. These were now gone and replaced with robes of some kind, or something like a kimono or karate gi. It was hard to tell exactly what, given Kirk's own lack of expertise with the intricacies of human clothing and the fact that Lewis had probably designed the garment from memory. The end result was something loose and comfortable. Lewis was curled up in his thinking chair, the huge comfortable one that Kirk could have almost squeezed himself into, reading something off a tablet. "Hey man, come on in." "How are you doing?" Kirk asked, accepting his invitation and entering the suite properly. It was remarkably clean, especially considering Lewis's self-confessed propensity for squalor. "Trying to get my head around quantum computing," Lewis murmured, in the soft way he always did when concentrating. "I get the theory, there's just subtleties to the way the Cortai go about using qubits they're giving me an idea." "Like what?" "Don't even ask me to explain, man. I've got, a shape forming in my head, and, there's a bit that I think is going to fit there, but even if it does, ain't no way I'm going to be able to explain it without telling you the whole shape." "I like the new wardrobe," Kirk changed the subject. "Very zen." "I was going for Tron Legacy, man. Flint had his shit worked out." "He did?" "Yeah-huh. If you're going to spend however the fuck long in exile with, 2 or 3 people to talk to, tops, may as well be comfortable and meditate a lot." He swiped right on the tablet. "It helps, actually, weirdly." "I wouldn't know. Is this what you were doing yesterday?" "Yeah, dude. Ass finally went out on my jeans. You came along while I was buck-ass assembling some new duds." Kirk snorted, amused. "Lewis, what possible reason would I have to care?" he asked. Yeah, just because the whole galaxy are nudists, we're the weird ones," Lewis scoffed. "Clothing is practical, dude." "Practical for what, exactly?" "Well, fucking pockets for a start." Kirk just rocked his way backward onto his 4 hind legs, the comfortable sedentary posture of a Turk not planning to go anywhere for a while. He was wearing a utility belt, 2 holsters, and a pair of saddlebags, none of which would have begun to qualify as clothing by human standards, yet which meant that he was already rather better equipped with pockets than Lewis ever had been in his jeans. Certainly Lewis's Flynn robes didn't seem to have pockets at all. He decided not to press the issue. That way lay an argument just as intractable as trying to point out to the Kurumbura that they were, biologically speaking, obligate omnivores, and that their strictly herbivorous lifestyle led to malnutrition problems that had placed a permanent burden on their economy. Certainly the Kurumbura and the Gowans had been at odds over that point from the instant the Gowans had first made contact. "Not to rush you," he said delicately, "but I was rather expecting that you would have started to build things and experiment by now." "I have." "You have?" "Sure. I've just not built anything useful, man, so it's all gone back in the recycler." Kirk angled his head so that he could get Lewis into his very limited range of binocular vision. "Nothing useful at all?" "Well, I made the washer-dryer and an oven and some cake tins for Vedrig, and don't forget all these tablets." Lewis shrugged, swiping right again. "But, as for the big project? Yeah, I've thrown together a few basic ideas, some proofs of concept, but I can either do the mad scientist thing and fill my space with every last shitty little project that's never going to come to anything until I've got nowhere to work, or I can keep the place tidy." "You do keep saying that you are naturally an untidy person," Kirk pointed out. "Dude, you have no idea what untidy really is," Lewis told him, setting the tablet aside. "I'm being fucking careful here because I..." He stopped, suddenly and visibly emotional, then sprang to his feet. "Room, how far to Sol?" The room spoke in a clearly synthetic voice. "The approximate straight-line distance from this station to Sol is half a galactic radial length." "That's about 7 kiloparsecs, Kirk. 23,000 light years. If we had sanctuary here and I hopped in her right now and flew her straight home, it'd take me 2.5 weeks. And that's if I magically somehow managed to do it without having to stop to Teak House every day." Lewis cleared his throat and gestured to the map. The straight-line route strayed dangerously close to the galactic core, where starships never dared to venture. "If I took the space lanes..." "Room, if I had a ship with cruising speed of 500 kilolights, how long would it take me to reach Sol via cleared space lanes?" "Calculating. Approximate travel distance 1.3 galactic radial lengths. Approximate journey duration in human units rounding up, not including necessary resupply and degauss stops, 60 days. Kirk watched Lewis's shoulders sag before he turned around. "And Cimbrean is even farther. 2 months, Kirk. If I had the fastest ship in the Milky Way right here, it'd take me 2 months to get home. On most ships, like if I tried to hitchhike home on freighters or whatever, I could be at it for years." He dismissed the galactic projection with a swipe of his arm. "I am a long ways from other humans right now. I like you and Vedrig well enough, sure, but you guys can go without if you have to. Me? If I'm not very, very careful, dude, I'm going to go crazy, and I fucking know it. I have got to take care of myself. No mess, no clutter, do my chores, exercise, say my fucking prayers, whatever, and maybe I'll be able to go a few years without completely losing my shit." There was a long moment of silence, and then Lewis climbed back into his thinking chair. "So, maybe you'd better let me get on with all this studying I gotta do, 'cause the sooner I get it done and come up with a solution, the sooner I can get out of this cage you shoved me in. Good talk, buddy. Let's do this again tomorrow." Not quite knowing what to say, Kirk watched him in silence for a minute, then pushed his weight forward onto all 6 legs again and made himself scarce. Date point: 10 years, 4 months AV. Byron Group Headquarters, Omaha, Nebraska, USA, Earth. Kevin Jenkins. Rachel glanced up at him and gave him her professional smile and gestured to the door. "Go right on through, Mr. Jenkins." "Thanks, Rachel." Of all the perks that he had acquired during the last few weeks, Kevin was finding that the one he enjoyed most was that he could walk into Moses Byron's office whenever the hell he liked. Nobody else in the group enjoyed that privilege. He whispered to himself as he entered Byron's office, reflecting on his expensive suit and 6-figure salary with a bonus. "Look at me now, Moira." "What was that?" Byron set his tablet down on his desk and looked up. Just talking to myself, boss. Only way to get some intelligent conversation sometimes, Byron chuckled and sat back, folding his arms comfortably. What's up? Company wants a final report on that lunar jump beacon. Figured it'd only be fair to get your side. Byron frowned. He hated having the subject of that particular blunder raised. Agent Williams already got that out of me, he grumbled. Figures she's not interested in hearing the positives, Mr. Byron. Byron made a tired noise. What is this, Kevin? Good cop, bad cop? Am I paying you to be my interrogator now? You're paying me to make sure the company never has to visit your office ever again, Kevin pointed out. Okay. Byron stood up and hit his wet bar again. Kevin had noticed that he did that in pretty much every meeting, and also that, except the meeting with Special Agent Williams, a.k.a. Darcy, he never actually drank when he mixed. Presumably, it was all a ploy to put his people at their ease and steer the conversation his way. What's your poison? He asked. I'm fine without, thanks. 1 DUI is enough for a lifetime. We've got people who could drive you back, Byron pointed out. Takes all the fun out of it, boss. Byron sighed and reclaimed a little momentum by mixing something for himself, a Virgin Manhattan, before sitting down as he dropped the maraschino cherry. Okay, fire away. Robert Frost. Frost had been one of the 4 crew on Reclamation, the ship that Byron had set out to investigate the disappearances of BGEVs 1, 3, 4, and 6. Somewhere during the ill-fated mission's chain of misadventures, Frost had been forced to take a translator implant. He'd been under the scanner of a surgical robot, about to have the implant whipped straight back out again when a hierarchy agent had stepped into his head and used the body to murder the Reclamation's captain, Jason Nolan. Things had only gotten worse for them after that, but a full recording of the changes in Frost's brain as he was taken over had, briefly, been in the hands of Byron Group's scientists. Byron had promptly deleted it. Byron set his drink down a little too sharply. What about him? Williams wasn't impressed that you destroyed the evidence there, the scans of his brain, all that stuff. Unethical, Byron grunted. Couldn't be used without huge human rights violations, and couldn't be kept without maybe ruining the group if it ever leaked. Kevin had to agree, but he had the questions he'd been instructed to ask. Not even to research ways to stop that control from happening? I trust my people, Byron said. Whenever they know things I don't, I defer to them. That's true of you, and it's true of Erickson and Billings. Both of them recommended destroying the data. When I discussed the implications with Mr. Williams, our Williams that is, our chief of security, he said the exact same thing. And why not forward it to the government? Byron snatched the drink up again and stood to tour the office. This may come as a surprise to you, Kevin, but I don't trust the government, he said, fetching up by the window. The government has been sitting on a secret this huge for years. It knows who destroyed San Diego and why, and more defense spending than my whole group is worth has gone dark in going after them. All of which has vindicated my lack of trust in them, which I've had since long before pretty little Agent Williams waltzed in here and told me off like a naughty schoolboy. He drained the mocktail in one and set it down on top of his bookshelf with a shaking hand, plainly angry. Extinction, he snarled, spinning around subtly. These people are playing with extinction, and they're keeping people like me out of the loop. People who could help. Because, yeah, I knew something was up with the implants, but I was worried about corporate sabotage or spying. I was worried about losing more good people, so I added a failsafe to get them home fast in case something went wrong. Stuff like that, small tragedies that we could handle. Nobody said a dang thing about extinction, and I had no good reason to suspect that it was even on the cards. But no, only the government can handle the responsibility of playing games with the lives of billions. Only the government has that right. He strode back to his chair and threw himself into it. If I wasn't happy with having that data used by my people, then what in the Sam hell makes you think I'd forward it to the government? He asked. It'd be just as unethical if they used it, and just as ruinous to us if it ever got out that we were the ones who supplied it. And you can put every mother-loving word I just said into your report verbatim, Kevin. I don't need a positive spin on that one. Kevin took a deep breath and gave it time for some of Byron's rage to dissipate out of the room. You sure you didn't want something with alcohol in it, boss? He asked lightly. Byron grunt chuckled. One liver's enough for a lifetime, he said, echoing Kevin's earlier sentiment. Reckon if I start drinking every time I get stressed, that way lies a couple of transplants. No, thank you. Did the company want you to ask me anything else? I think you've said enough, Kevin replied, putting his phone away. He'd recorded the whole rant. Anything you need from me before I head back? Matter of fact, there is. Byron stood up again and retrieved an old-fashioned physical document in a slim black plastic folder from atop his filing cabinet. He spun it onto the desk in front of Kevin. You hear all the brouhaha up in Vancouver over the 3 space cadets who came home? They're fellow abductees and friends of an old friend, in fact, Kevin said, opening it. The folder contained duplex printouts of the 3 sanctuary survivals and a quick rundown of everything that the group had been able to learn about them. Even at a cursory glance, their summaries made for impressive reading, and they didn't include some of what Kevin knew about Kirk and his mission. No kidding. Well, I want them for EV-11, not least because this Etsicity fellow's got about the most sophisticated prosthetic foot on Earth, and that's a market I wouldn't mind breaking into. Any objections? None so long as that's all they've got, cyber-wise, Kevin shook his head. It's only stuff that touches the brain that I'm worried about, though for personal reasons I wouldn't mind having a word with them. That's fine. Not a bad idea if you meet them in person and assess them anyways. Reckon your other employers will object? I doubt it. Okay, go have fun talking to your friends of a friend. Byron technically had to wait for Kevin to decide to leave, but despite that, in Kevin's opinion, the man was a high-functioning psychopath and a narcissist. He was still a damn good boss, and Kevin didn't mind letting him think he had the power. Keeping Byron's ego feeling unbruised made life easier for everyone else who worked with him. He stood and headed out. Try not to get in trouble while I'm gone, boss. Byron toasted him with an empty glass. Kevin, you're on my speed dial, he said. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I am the Casual Deathworlder, your host, and this has been The Deathworlders, Chapter 24, Part 6. If you enjoyed this content, please smash those like and subscribe buttons and consider dropping us off a virgin to sacrifice to the algorithm. Drop us a comment to help feed the algorithm. As always, a huge shout out to my editor, Graygor. Thank you very much, buddy. Onward and upward from here. Okay, question of the day. Castles. Who here has visited or plans to visit a castle one day? Which castle and in what country? Me personally, I used to live in Japan in a place called Iwakuni and used to visit Iwakuni Castle all the time. So leave your answers in the comments down below. Until next time, be safe, be well. I love you all. Bye-bye.